You're listening to episode number 5 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking about first foods for babies and toddlers. Now, when Josh and Simon were babies, the first food that crossed their lips was rice cereal, served by yours truly on a spoon. But today, families are opting for a whole new feeding approach. I had never heard of it when my boys were babies, but it is called Baby-Led Weaning, also known as baby-led feeding. Now, this is where babies are encouraged to actually feed themselves. Now, what is baby-led weaning? How does it work? What are the benefits? And which foods are best suited for this self-guided style of eating? Well, joining me on the show today is Katie Ferraro. She is a registered dietitian. She's a mom of not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 babies. Yes, she has quadruplets. She also has a toddler, and she is an expert on feeding little wee ones. That's redundant, isn't it? Wee ones, yes. She's an expert. She's really like big time in the trenches. So she's going to be here to guide us through baby-led weaning, and together we're going to share a nutritious brand new recipe that I just created for fluffy ricotta and California avocado pancakes. We're also going to talk about ways to add nutrient-rich avocados to your family's diet, from pancakes onward. We have so many ideas. And I'll tell you, whether you have a toddler or a baby or even a teen at your table, everything we talk about today is going to be really relevant. Because when I was making these pancakes, Simon, who is 18, pretty much ate every last one. He did say they're kind of mild. I'm like, yeah, because it's a recipe for babies. But I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. He ate them all. Before we get started, I just would like to thank our sponsors. I have a special sponsor for today's show. Today's show is actually brought to you by the California Avocado Commission, representing the nearly 4,000 family farms who grow those delicious and versatile California avocados. For recipes and more, visit californiaavocado.com. I also would like to thank Zespri Kiwi Fruit. They are the global leader in premium quality kiwi fruit. Zespri Sun Gold Kiwi Fruit, that's a special type of kiwi fruit. It's got a tropical sweet taste and a smooth, hairless skin, plus a juicy yellow flesh. It is so amazing. They're at my market now. I'm so excited. It's a healthy snack. You can eat it on the go. You just cut, scoop with a spoon, and enjoy. Sun Golds are available in grocery stores across the U.S. I'm going to have to ask Katie if they're out in San Diego where she lives, but they're certainly here in the Boston area. You can learn more at zesprikiwi.com. I'd also like to thank another one of my wonderful sponsors, Bush's Beans. You know, if you're on my blog, Liz's Healthy Table, that I am a huge fan of black beans, pinto beans, garbanzo, cannellini beans, you name it. They're so versatile. For recipes and more, you can visit their website at bushbeans.com. And finally, it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't spend a moment to thank my friends at superhealthykids.com for recipes, meal plans. Be sure to head on over to their website. So, enough about me. I am so excited to welcome Katie Ferraro to Liz's Healthy Table. So Katie, welcome to the show.
Hi Liz, thank you so much for having me.
Katie and I have been trying to do this podcast for, I feel like it's been a year, but your babies are 15 months old, so maybe I'm exaggerating just a little bit.
It feels like a lifetime.
It does feel, yeah, when you have quadruplets, I'm sure it feels like a lifetime. Well, before you tell us all about those gorgeous babies, I do want to say that I have worked for the California Avocado Commission doing recipe development on and off for, I guess, about 5 years. And Katie, you've also done some work for California Avocados, right?
Yes, I'm a nutrition spokesperson for them for about the past 7 years.
Oh, so you beat me to the punch then. 7 years. Wow, that's a long time. And you're right in California. You're in San Diego. So you're just in the heart of avocado country. I'm very jealous of you.
I know, we have really amazing California avocados for a good chunk of the summer, which I'm pretty excited about, but I'm also very excited about the new recipe that you created, so I have some more creative things to do with that amazing fruit.
And you have a lot of mouths to feed. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself before we get into babies. Tell us just you're a registered dietitian. Just give me the quick backstory. Tell everybody, who's Katie Ferraro?
Sure, I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I'm also an infant feeding expert. As you mentioned, I'm a mom of 5 small kids, so that takes up a lot of my time. But for the last couple of years, I've really been focused on the infant and child feeding space. And interestingly enough, my mom is also a dietitian, so that's how I got into the field of nutrition. And I used to work primarily with adult products and different food companies and commodity boards, helping them deliver their message. But when my whole life kind of became consumed by trying to manage and feed a bunch of small kids at once, I really shifted the focus and started learning a little bit more about the baby-led approach to feeding kids, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But I do want to say, for those of you for whom this might be a new concept, there's a lot of challenges sometimes for starting this approach, and I want to encourage you to stay with it, because my own mom, who's a dietitian, was appalled that I decided to skip spoon feeding of purees. And much like you mentioned, Liz, with your kids, she said, well, I did iron fortified white rice cereal with all of you guys. I'm one of 6 kids, and there's nothing wrong with you, so I don't know why you need to go starting your kids on avocados and all these other foods. So sometimes we have to seek support from other areas, but I'll have you know now that my babies are incredibly avid eaters. My mom and my dad brag all over the place about their grandkids that eat beets and sardines and all this stuff, but they weren't necessarily that supportive from the beginning. So it's definitely been a learning curve for our whole family.
Did I hear you say sardines?
Gosh, my daughter Clara loves sardines. And it's so interesting. It's one of those foods that we're kind of conditioned as adults to dislike, from either the smell or the context, or maybe, how sardines were either presented or not presented to you growing up. But babies are a blank slate. My daughter Claire, and my other kids like it, but Claire, if she sees the sardine tin, she goes crazy and she'll love them. They make a great snack.
That is just so amazing. So tell me about your babies. They're 15 months old. Tell everybody their names. Give me just like a little insight into each kid. Claire, we know, loves sardines. So start with Claire.
Well, I think I should start with my oldest daughter, Molly. She's really kind of the impetus for why we got interested in a baby-led approach to feeding. Because I, like a lot of parents, when my oldest daughter was ready to start solid foods, or I thought she was ready, I asked my pediatrician what to do. And I think there's a lot of amazing pediatricians out there who really understand and value nutrition. But the reality is I'm also a college nutrition professor. One thing that I teach my future doctors, the medical students I work with, and nurse practitioners is you have to remember that 90% of physicians in this country have never had a dedicated nutrition class. So my doctor told me, hey, start feeding rice cereal by spoon when your baby's 4 months old. I have to admit, it felt a little weird. My daughter Molly didn't really seem ready. She definitely wasn't interested in food. And from the outset, feeding became a downright battleground. She absolutely hated being fed. She wanted nothing to do with any of those beautiful pureed vegetables that I was painstakingly preparing for her in the frozen ice cube trays. And I had a terrible foray into feeding. And I felt like such a failure because, what sort of mom can't feed her own child? But let alone, what sort of dietitian mom can't feed her kid? But my Molly hated eating. And I got to the point where I was embarrassed to feed her in public. I have a sister who has a number of children older than my oldest, and she would say, it looks like you're force feeding her, and she definitely hates eating. I thought, gosh, I am totally failing at this feeding thing. So at the height of my feeding frustration was when I found out I was pregnant with quadruplets. Now, that would come as a shock to anyone, and I had been doing fertility treatment, so I knew that the potential for multiples was there, but I certainly wasn't expecting quadruplets. Now, when everyone always says, well, what'd you do when you found out you were pregnant with quads? And I said, a normal person who would get this news, not that it's normal news, might think like, how am I going to pay for college for all of them? Or how am I going to teach them to drive at once? But literally, because I was struggling so hard with feeding Molly at home, the first thought that flashed through my head was, how the heck am I going to feed all 4 kids at once if I can't even feed one at a time? And so fast forward, they were born, thankfully, at 34 weeks, which the average gestation for quads is 28 weeks. It was really kind of a miracle that they made it that long. They were in the NICU for just about a month, and they were all born between 3 and 4 pounds and relatively healthy.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, very minimal side effects. However, I spent a lot of time in the NICU those first couple of weeks, and with a lot of downtime in the hospital, I had friends visiting, and a couple of friends who were dietitians came. One in particular started talking to me. You know, I was at kind of my wit's end, and I really didn't mind sharing at that point, listen, I can't even feed my older daughter. Like, what the heck am I going to do with 5? And she told me about this approach to feeding, which is an alternative to spoon feeding called baby-led weaning. And the gist of it is that you bypass kind of the force feeding and spoon feeding of pureed foods. You wait till the baby is interested in and certainly physically ready and capable of eating real food, and then you let them direct the feeding from the outset. So I started, I said, well, that sounds interesting, but it also sounds like some kind of woo-woo, flash-in-the-pan parenting thing. Liz, you said, it's not something you had heard of, but it wasn't really around at the time when you were feeding your kids. So is this a legitimate way to feed your kids? Is what I really kind of sunk my teeth into from a professional standpoint, really researching the entire approach to baby-led feeding and looking at all of the data and all of the material out there to see, you know what? There actually is a real incredible emerging body of evidence that supports this baby-led approach to feeding. And so it was something that I started to implement with my own family and my own kids. And when my quads were ready to start eating at their 6-month adjusted age, and we can talk about readiness to feed because it is important when you start, they immediately took to eating. And it was an incredibly opposite experience as I had with Molly. So you asked me to go through all 4 kids. Their names are Charlie, Claire, Henry, and Dylan. And what's so interesting is starting them all at the same time, you're dealing with 4 different personalities and temperaments and tastes, and also different nap schedules. As much as I wanted them all to be on the same schedule, there was a lot of logistics and a lot of trying to figure out what's the best way to start food. And one of our kids, Henry, who's the 3rd quadruplet, he really just wasn't interested in it from the outset. And even today, I would consider him a pretty proficient eater, but he's just a little bit less interested in food than the rest of his siblings are. And I always have them sit in birth order. I'm a little superstitious about that. And Henry sits next to Claire, and Claire's constantly stealing food off his plate because she loves eating, and he really couldn't care less. So it's been a blast really learning the 4 different feeding personalities. And then I've really dedicated myself professionally since starting to feed these guys with helping other families learn how to do a baby-led approach to feeding, because it's been such a wonderful godsend for our family. And my ultimate goal is I like food, and I want my kids to like food as well. So as far as raising an avid eater who likes and accepts all types of food, and to help prevent picky eating, I really think that a baby-led approach to feeding is the way to go.
Now, if people want to learn more about you and baby-led weaning, what sort of resources, Katie, do you have on your website? So give people your website right now, and then we're going to dig deep into baby-led weaning. But what's your website, and what sorts of resources do you have for parents? Because, you know what it's like when you surf the web, and you can get pretty overwhelmed pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, one of the reasons why I started my nutrition consulting practice for families, which is called the Fortified Family, and that website is fortifiedfam, that's FAM.com, was because I was so frustrated when I was trying to learn about baby-led weaning. Sure, I could go as a college professor, access our college library and all the peer-reviewed published journal articles, but most moms and caregivers and parents aren't going to do that. I was frustrated at the lack of how online about baby-led feeding. Now, there's lots of stuff about the philosophy about a baby-led approach, and part of it is a philosophy. So I get the why you would want to do it or what it is, but I got stumped and I got stuck when it came to how do you actually do baby-led feeding. And so that's why in my website, The Fortified Family, I spend a lot of time walking parents through a very simplified system that I've developed to help start a baby-led approach to feeding in your family. And for the listeners who are interested in learning more, I've also developed a course, an online digital course that puts this system into practice, and that's called the Self-Feeding Baby. So if you go to selffeedingbaby.com, you can learn more about this course, where in 5 hours of really short video modules with a lot of visuals, I show you how to make this baby-led approach work for you. Hopefully, my goal is with my work is to help fill the gap for parents to make it easy and, no pun intended, but digestible information that parents can get in a short period of time to kind of set themselves on the path to feeding success.
Katie, share the URL for Fortified Family. Spell it for everybody, and then give us the URL again for your e-course.
Okay, sure. So all the resources that you need for starting your kids on solids, you can go to my website, The Fortified Family, and the URL is fortifiedfam.com. So that's FORTIFIEDFAM.com. TIFIEDFAM.com. And just a little history, the reason why it's called the fortified family is because in nutrition, if you fortify something, you're adding something that wasn't previously there. And I think for a lot of families, to be honest, we just eat food because it's there or we're hungry. It's not really until we have kids that we sometimes really start focusing on what we're putting into our bodies and into the bodies of our kids. So we're adding a layer that wasn't there before. So I'm helping to fortify the family. And the notion there is that good food fuels strong families. So all the materials we will find on that site are to help you fuel your family. Now, if you're interested in the course, The Self-Feeding Baby, which is a self-paced digital course you can finish in as little as 5 hours, that's selffeedingbaby.com.
Okay, and you know what? With Fortified Family, I thought it was a play on words. You went from 4 to 5, like the 4 babies, and then Molly, 4 to 5.
I never thought of it that way. Well, some of our personal stuff is fortified, spelled F-O-U-R, and that is kind of I'm really a sucker for puns, so a little play on the quadruplets there. But to be honest, Molly really runs the show at our house, so I never like to say that anything is just about the quads, because she's definitely the boss of all of us.
She rules the roost. I love that. So baby-led feeding, this approach. So we're not going to be using a spoon. We're going to let babies kind of guide themselves through the process. Now, as a new mom, and I'm not one, but I was one, I would say, okay, my baby's ready to eat at 6 months. That is, I've talked to my doctor. I've gotten the go-ahead. I've consulted my pediatrician. 6 months now is the recommendation when your baby is potentially ready, right? So what about baby-led feeding or baby-led weaning? I mean, if you're not giving them pureed foods on a spoon, what are they eating with their hands? And is it obviously not going to, increase their risk of choking, or we wouldn't be here talking about it. But how does it all work?
Well, certainly, and you bring up a really important point when you mention your pediatrician saying that your baby's ready to eat at 6 months. That tells me that you have a forward-thinking pediatrician. Unfortunately, there's a lot of doctors out there still giving outdated recommendations, which is to start solid foods as early as 4 months. And the reality is that for the first 6 months of life, all your baby needs is breast milk or infant formula. There is no physiological need for food. If you have a fussy baby, or if your baby's underweight, you may need to fortify the formula or fortify the breast milk. But that's between you should be working with a feeding specialist at that point. But babies don't need to eat until 6 months. So waiting until 6 months is key for helping foster the baby's ability to self-feed. Now, as far as the question about what foods do you start with, it's true. Traditionally, a lot of pediatricians would recommend start out with iron-fortified white rice cereal. Now, there's no actual reason why a baby should, quote-unquote, need to start with that food. It is true that babies' iron stores that they got from their mom at the tail end of pregnancy, those start to dissipate at about 6 months of age. But there are plenty of other foods that we as adults eat that have iron in them that are certainly appropriate for babies to eat. So always encourage parents to make sure you're incorporating foods that have iron, like meat and fish and poultry, if you do eat meats. If not, there's some plant-based sources that have iron, and in some cases, babies might need supplements. But the cool thing about a baby-led approach to feeding is that there's data to suggest that babies who start with baby-led feeding are at no higher risk of choking than are babies who are spoon-fed. And on top of that, there's also no data that shows that babies who do baby-led feeding have any sort of nutrient gaps that you wouldn't otherwise see in spoon-fed babies. So for parents who are worried about, maybe they're not going to get enough iron, or maybe they're going to choke, the data does not support either of those notions. So the reality is we can move forward with confidence by offering what we call age-appropriate foods. So on your question about what do you feed, one of the first foods that works really well for babies is avocado. Now, avocado is the first food that I offered my quadruplets. If you're not comfortable doing solid foods, you certainly could puree it and offer it by spoon. But with a true baby-led approach to feeding, the baby is allowed to self-regulate and feed themselves, which is wonderful because from the outset, we're helping our babies listen to and honor and respond to their hunger and fullness cues. Because if I sit there and push a spoonful of food down my baby's throat, I'm the one determining how much and how fast the baby eats. And that kind of takes the power away from the baby. So with baby-led feeding, we give the power to the baby, but we give them, for example, with the avocados, you might cut it into a quarter and then cut it into slices. We usually say it needs to be bigger or close to the size of an adult's pinky finger, because you want to have a food that a baby can grasp. And babies who are only 6 months old, they haven't developed that pincer grasp yet. So they can't pick up things like blueberries and gracefully feed themselves. They need kind of chunkier foods and think more like the shape of a French fry and even thicker than that to pick it up, grasp it with their closed fist, and then have an inch or two sticking above the fist so they can actually get the food in their mouth. Because there's nothing worse than watching a new eater struggle with food in their fist and they can't figure out how to get it out. So I always recommend starting with avocados because the texture is perfect. It's very soft, it's pliable, it's easy for the baby to pick up. But on top of that, it's packed with good fats, and our babies need fat in order to help with their brain development. And there's nearly 20 vitamins and minerals. So we like to talk about bang for your bite foods. In nutrition, the nutrition nerds, we all call it nutrient-dense foods. But I've done a lot of research, and parents have no idea what that means. So we call it more bang for your bite foods, and avocado is certainly one of those.
I love that. Yeah. More bang for your bite. I haven't heard that. That's great.
So we also recommend sometimes starting with foods like sweet potatoes, another great one. You can roast sweet potato, remove the skin, cut it into long sticks, and the baby can pick it up and feed themselves. They've got a really robust flavor. And then we really start recommending, moving babies onto combination foods within a couple of weeks. Because too often what I see in my practice is parents will get stuck on one puree, or one texture rather. They might be offering purees for months on end. Okay, and if you think about it, there's not that many pureed foods. And our goal is to offer our babies as many different foods as possible in the first year of life. Because we know that between 6 and 12 months, the babies who try the greatest number of textures and tastes and flavors, those are the babies who end up less likely to be picky eaters. So I always encourage babies eating 100 different foods by the time they turn 1. And I actually have a great resource for your listeners. If you guys want to download my guide for the 100 first foods your baby should try before turning 1, you can go to 100babyfoods.com. And there you can enter your information, get the quick guide, and check it off as you go, because 100 sounds like a lot. And even if you have a well-balanced diet, it might be hard. We all get stuck in ruts and offer the same foods and try the same foods, but our babies deserve better. And we really need to push their palate in that second 6 months of life. So I say strive for 100 different foods by the first birthday if you can.
So give us a quick snapshot. Obviously not all 100, but what are some of the unexpected foods on your list?
Well, one of the things I love about baby-led feeding is that I can serve my babies slightly modified variations of the same exact food that the rest of my family is eating. I'm a busy working mom with a lot of other activities going on, and the last thing I need to do is be short order cooking for my picky toddler and then the baby that will eat this and the baby that won't eat that. So what I actually end up serving my babies is just variations of the foods I'm already making for the rest of my family. Now, you never want to have added salt or added sugar to your baby food. So you mentioned that Simon thought that the fluffy ricotta California avocado pancakes were a little on the mild side. Okay, but the point is baby food doesn't have to taste bad. We're conditioned oftentimes to eat foods that are very salty and not even notice it. Okay, we don't want our babies to develop an over affinity for sweet and salty foods. So there's lots of wonderful ways to season the foods using other herbs and spices and ingredients that don't involve extra sugar and salt. So some of the I would say, the foods that my parents and my husband's parents brag about to their friends that the babies eat, they love. Claire loves everything except beets. The other babies love beets, and beets are the one food that I cannot tolerate as much as I try. Every year I try them just to see if I can handle them. But these babies, 3 out of the 4, gobble down beets. They love sardines, as I mentioned, and they love all sorts of seafood. And that's another thing, a lot of parents aren't aware that there's been a lot of changes in the guidelines about the introduction of potentially allergenic foods. We want our babies to be introduced to seafood and shellfish and peanuts and eggs and wheat and soy and dairy. Okay, as long as you don't have already a diagnosed food allergy or the parents have diagnosed food allergies. In that case, you need to be a little bit more careful. But if there's no risk of food allergy, you've got to start working those foods in early as well. So my babies love shrimp stir fry, and we eat a lot of fritters in our house because whole grains are wonderful from a nutritional standpoint, but they're really hard for kids to eat, and they tend to make a huge mess. So I like to make fritters out of leftover sweet potatoes or mashed up beans, any sort of whole grain I have left, a little bit of egg and some breadcrumbs, fry it up, and fat is good. We want our babies to eat fat again for that brain development. So I would say they pretty much eat anything that I have in my fridge, which is helpful because I don't end up wasting food and I don't end up short order cooking for them either.
Katie, I have a recipe on my website for corny salmon cakes. Would you give babies that recipe, or would you leave the corn out because you've got those little corn kernels? Would that be a problem?
Well, it depends on how old the baby is. The first time a baby is introduced to a food, I like to introduce the food by itself. So if the baby's never tried salmon, and salmon is a wonderful first baby food, one of the top 10 first baby foods I actually recommend, but I would offer it on its own. But after a few weeks, when your baby's been trying lots of different foods, certainly I would move into a combination food like a salmon corny cake. Corn kernels by themselves would be very hard for a 6 or a 7-month-old to manipulate because that fine pincer grasp, babies usually don't develop that until somewhere between 8 to 10 or 11 months. But putting it into a fritter or a cake is a great way to get that nutrition into them. And we want our babies to eat whole, intact foods because they need fiber as well. One of the biggest complaints I hear from parents who are starting spoon feeding, in addition to it being kind of tedious but also not very well accepted by the babies, is that their baby tends to get pretty constipated. And if you think about it, it's because a lot of times the pureed foods, they have minimal amounts of fiber. Babies need fiber as much as we as adults do to have regular bowel movements. So I always encourage those whole intact foods like corn. Corn on the cob is another great one. If you need to occupy your baby for any length of time, I always give mine a half or corn on the cob and just let them gnaw on it. It will keep them occupied while you're preparing the rest of the meal.
Wow. Corn on the cob. This is blowing my mind because, when my boys were young, it was the pureed peas and the pureed, everything. And
did you ever taste that? It actually tastes terrible. Like it's food you wouldn't eat yourself. Why would you feed it to your baby? It's kind of teaching them from the outset that food doesn't taste good. And that's the opposite of what we want our kids to know, which is to like and love and explore and play with their food in hopes that they will then like and accept all types of foods.
So you've got your kids eating 100 foods by the time they turned 1. Now they're 1. Is it really paying off already? Compared to, say, what happened with Molly, are their palates so broad now that, you've talked about beets and sardines. This is incredible.
Well, certainly, and I, as a child feeding expert, know that there's going to be inevitable times where their palates will fluctuate, and there will be phases of some picky eating setting in. So I'm not saying that they're set for life, but the reality is I feel like with baby-led weaning, we set the stage for them to be successful eaters, that they're going to eat more often than not what's put out there. But at the very minimum, I need to continue to offer that variety. And that's the key with baby-led weaning, is that you have to be persistent. The research shows us that you may have to introduce a food or a texture to a baby or a child between 10 and 15 times before they accept it. Now, a lot of parents will give their kid broccoli one time and say, oh, my kid doesn't like broccoli. Well, how many times did you give it to them? And did you just boil it? Because, I like broccoli, but plain boiled broccoli is not that great. But there's many other ways to kind of bring out the flavor of broccoli and other ingredients to pair it with and different ways to season it that don't involve salt. We have to offer those varieties. And so what I do through my work is to give parents simple solutions so that they can make that variety a reality by the time the baby's 1. Now, I would say even Molly, who's almost 3, she's actually started eating better as a result of being surrounded by kids who are pretty good eaters. And part of it is, I'm not saying I'm ignoring her, but I don't focus and I don't stress out about her picky eating. I know through what I've learned from baby-led weaning, what I've researched and read, is that children who are exposed to the different foods will eventually start to like it, but they might take their own time, right? All kids develop at different paces. So I would say one benefit is that my older child has actually become less picky. So even if you already have a child who's picky, these tenets hold true for you. That is, offering these varieties of food can really help your baby turn it around. It won't be overnight. Okay? And it is a lot of work because you have to be persistent. On top of that, I find that baby-led weaning is less expensive than traditional spoon feeding. If you go to the grocery store or Target, those pouches which line the baby food aisle, and I always like to tell parents, those pouches were filled before your baby was even born. This is not fresh, wholesome, intact foods, and these things cost about $2 a pop at this point. So I work with families whose kids are eating 4 and 5 pouches a day. It's $8 to $10 a day. I can feed my entire family dinner for that amount, and that dinner consists of real food. And then lastly, I think that baby-led weaning is beneficial because it saves time. I don't have to short order cook. I can batch cook and I can prep ahead of time and always have stuff prepared, because it's one of the biggest struggles for parents and caregivers, especially working parents. How do I know, or where do I find the time to prepare what's for dinner? We certainly don't have time to prepare 2 or 3 meals. So baby-led weaning streamlines that food prep to help give you more time to do the things that are important to your family rather than just stressing out about food.
And you know what? One thing I love to do is with sweet potato. I just did it last night for the boys. I took sweet potato and I cut it into the kind of those finger shapes, like you talked about, the pinky finger shape. I then took Brussels sprouts. I trimmed them and I cut them in half. And then I had half a head of cauliflower and I cut that into florets. And then I tossed everything with olive oil, seasoned with a little kosher salt and black pepper, and then I roasted it at 425 till tender. And that did not take long. After like 10 minutes, I stirred everything up, popped it back in the oven, maybe another 5-10 minutes, and everything was cooked. So the roasting brought out this amazing, naturally kind of sweet flavor. And I'm wondering if that kind of a preparation would be good for babies as well.
Certainly, I would prepare that exactly the same way for my babies. I might check the Brussels sprouts just to make sure that they're tender. Now, that's a little hard. You know, Brussels sprouts past that point where then they get soggy. But think about boiled Brussels sprouts, which to me are vile, compared to roasted Brussels sprouts with olive oil or another oil, which are delicious. So it's the same food, just prepared in a different manner. And to be honest, roasting it brings out additional flavor, which makes it taste better. And then adding the fat is very important when you're feeding your baby. And too often I work with families who are very health conscious in the sense that they want their kids to eat a lot of vegetables, but they don't prepare them in a way that's really appropriate, in the sense that, you know, Brussels sprouts are great, but there's not a lot of calories in them, especially as our babies are weaning off of breast milk or formula. We want the food that they eat to be more bang for your bite food. So adding that fat, I tell parents, don't be afraid of fat. Okay, because we add it to the vegetables to add additional calories and very important nutrients. It also helps it taste better, but you're roasting it on top, which always brings out more flavor than just boiling those old vegetables.
I love roasted vegetables. And I think, too, you're right about the Brussels sprouts. Give them a little more time because the sweet potato is going to cook a lot faster. So you want to test that, make sure it's nice and tender. Bananas, too, right? We haven't even talked about bananas as another food that would be great for babies, right? You cut it into, again, those finger shapes and right.
Well, I think my babies, in addition to keeping the California Avocado Commission in business, are definitely keeping the banana folks in business. We eat 50, that's 50 bananas a week in our house. My babies love bananas. Thankfully, they're very affordable, but they're a perfect snack because they're pure carbohydrate, right? They're all fruit sugar. You hear parents say, oh, well, fruit has too much sugar. No, it doesn't. We want our kids to eat fruit. And the primary source of calories for babies has to come from carbohydrate. Their actual baseline carbohydrate needs are very similar to that of adults. So we need to be pushing carbs, and bananas are a great source of carbohydrate, not to mention the perfect texture. I would generally recommend for the starter babies, cut your banana long ways in half, and then put 2 halves down on the cutting board, and then cut it short way in half again, so you get quarters. And that's about the perfect size for a new eater to scoop up, have a little bit sticking out of their fist, and be able to eat that banana. Great texture, very full of nutrients, and important source of carbohydrate, because carbohydrate is what fuels our bodies and our babies' bodies, who are still growing really rapidly, albeit not as rapidly as in the first year. You know, once they start walking, for most babies is around that year point, they're burning a lot of calories, which leads me to another point, which is babies can't meet all of their needs after one in just 3 meals a day. And we often have parents who think, I want my kids to snack. But snacking is important because children have small stomachs. And I've heard many guests on your podcast, Liz, and through your work, learn that, you know, we do need snacks, and we need to be smart about snacking for our kids because they can't meet their needs in 3 meals alone with those small, tiny stomachs. So I think bananas make an excellent snack, and it's part of the reason why we go through 50 a week.
I love that. 50 bananas a week. Wow. You have a lot of mouths to feed. So let me talk to you a little bit about these pancakes, because we've been talking about avocados, a healthy fat, really important for brain health, heart health. We've been talking about bananas, carbohydrate. I've got oats in these pancakes, fiber, and you get fiber obviously from bananas and avocados. But before I get into the pancakes, can you just talk us through real quick avocado nutrition? We talked before about the good fats. We talked about all those great nutrients, almost 20 nutrients, like folate, right? So talk a little bit about avocado nutrition and then other ways you would give babies and toddlers avocados other than just fresh sliced avocados.
Certainly. And no matter what approach you're taking to feeding your babies, avocado makes a perfect first food. Even if you're more comfortable with spoon feeding of purees pureed avocado is a great texture to start with, and you can add a little bit of breast milk or formula to thin that down. And one thing I did want to mention if you're doing a baby-led approach to feeding is that purees are still an important texture for your baby to master. And through my work in the development of materials for baby-led weaning, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different speech-language pathologists who are infant feeding experts. And one of my good friends mentioned the other day that a third of her caseload of children with feeding problems comes from babies who did baby-led weaning who were never introduced to and now cannot tolerate purees. So I want to encourage parents, even if you're doing a baby-led approach to feeding, you still want to incorporate purees. It just doesn't have to be the first texture that you try, and it certainly doesn't have to be the only texture that you try. So puree avocado is great.
Are they eating that with their hands, the purees?
Well, I usually wait until a little bit later, so when the babies are about 9 months, I start introducing spoons, because the reality is, my mom pointed this out, I think it's great your kids eat with their hands, but someday they're going to be in a restaurant and have to learn how to use a fork. But I agree, Mom. So I give them utensils, and there's some fabulous companies out there making really cool utensils that are appropriately sized for babies and children to learn how to use utensils. I put it out there and I gave it to them. And what's cool watching my quadruplets is that they all develop their ability to use a spoon at their own pace and at different times. Somewhere between 9 and about 13 months, I would say, they all eventually got the hang of it. So don't stress out if your baby can't use a spoon, but offer the spoon, and sometimes they'll use it. It's great for foods that are naturally pureed, like applesauce, as long as there's no added sugar, or full-fat whole milk yogurt, which is a great puree texture. So I would use spoons for that, but a little bit later once they're much more comfortable with feeding themselves. But I let my baby self-feed, and I'll be honest with yogurt, we only have yogurt on bath day because you've ever let a baby feed themselves yogurt. It's terribly messy. However, they have a blast doing it, and that's a nutrient-packed food. But back to avocados, it makes a great first puree. And if you're offering solid foods, of course you can slice it. But I always encourage parents not to stop there. So what happens with baby-led weaning is parents get really gung-ho. They might offer some sliced avocado, some roasted sweet potatoes, some bananas, hopefully some ground meat in there for iron, maybe meatloaf or meatballs, and then they get stuck. And they don't move quickly up to combination foods. So I always encourage parents, look for recipes that have the foods that your babies have already tried. So for example, for avocados, if you go to CaliforniaAvocado.com, there's a trove of amazing recipes, almost all of which are appropriate for babies, with the exception of the amazing, awesome dessert recipes they have on there, which, Liz, I always make your California avocado key lime pie. It's one of my favorite dessert recipes. And, I let my babies have a taste of it here and there, but the reality is desserts are sometimes food, and there's certainly no need for desserts ever, and there's not room for desserts for babies under 1, but you do want your kids to be exposed to those, so I'll give them a taste of it here and there. But a lot of great recipes, like omelets, are a good way to incorporate avocados. Or pancakes, as you've done in that recipe. Thinking about breakfast. Avocado toast is one that I do a lot. I use avocado toast kind of as a base to top with other vegetables and even fruits as well. Working it into casseroles works really well. I think it gives a beautiful, vibrant color. I also love to make ahead muffins, so breakfast muffins. Now, they're not traditional muffins in the sense they don't have a lot of sugar. Simon would describe them as mild, but they make great breakfast foods that you can eat with your hands. So again, just working it into the foods that, how do you like avocado? I like it in ceviche. I let my kids have ceviche. They're a little bit older, and they love the avocado mixed with the lime and the taste of the fish. So there's really no way that you can't serve avocados, I would say, unless it's in dessert. You definitely want to minimize that for babies.
And nutrition-wise, what are some of the key nutrients that we all should know about?
Well, one of the things I think is amazing about avocados is that it's one of only 2 fruits that has fat. So an avocado is a fruit, and the fat in avocados are those good fats, meaning that they're primarily monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, so they're kind of heart-healthy fats. So we can say that avocados are a healthy superfood because they contain nearly 20 vitamins and minerals. And nothing in such a great amount that you wouldn't find it in another food. But the point is, compared to other fruits, it really doesn't compare because no other fruits have that important fat, those good fats that babies need for their brain development. So if you put texture with the fats, with the vitamins and minerals, it really is a fantastic starter food for babies and even other children of all ages.
I saw on the California Avocado website that they have a recipe which is great for babies, which is pears, really ripe pears, mashed with avocado. And then they do another recipe where they combine banana and avocado. So they make these little purees, so it's not just avocado, but they've added a little bit of sweetness to it. So I thought that was kind of a fun idea.
And that's what I love about avocados. They pair really well with either sweet or savory ingredients. You can mix it with fruit and it's perfectly fine, or you can mix it into something like a casserole or a pancake and that works as well.
I grilled avocados the other night. Oh my gosh, so good. So you take the avocado, slice it in half, remove the pit, and then I just squeezed a little bit of lime juice on top and then a little salt and pepper. And then Tim popped them out on the grill, put them obviously fruit side down. Avocados are a fruit, by the way, if you don't know that. And fruit side down, and then just grilled it for like 2 minutes. And it was so like warm and creamy. Oh my gosh. Are you eating that year round? Because you're in San Diego. I bet you're grilling all the time.
We do have the opportunity to cook out most of the time, and I know, thinking of you in the Northeast, that you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes I think you don't even appreciate it as much when every day is beautiful and sunny here, but I do agree that grilled avocados are fantastic, and there's some great recipes at californiaavocado.com that can show you how to do it to really kind of bring out the really unique flavor of avocados.
Yum, yum. So let me talk everybody through the fluffy ricotta and California avocado pancakes. So this makes 5 servings, 2 pancakes per person, per baby, per toddler. And obviously, like Katie said, your child's appetite is just going to vary so much. Right now, my boys are eating me out of house and home. I made beef stew this morning. It's like the dead of summer. And I made this giant beef stew because I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't feed them enough. So anyway, that's a little segue, a little side note. But for this recipe, for pancakes, you're going to need 1 ripe banana, peel it, mash it, and then half of a ripe California avocado, which you're also going to peel, pit, and mash. And then to that, you're going to add 2 large eggs, a 1/3 cup of ricotta cheese, and I used whole milk ricotta, knowing that this would be for babies, a 1/3 cup of whole milk. Again, you could use low fat, but I had whole milk in the fridge, and I knew that was kind of the audience I was going for. And then just a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then just whisk that all together. And then in a separate bowl, you want to combine a cup of quick cooking oats, a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and then a teaspoon of baking powder, and then whisk that together. And then just add the oats right into that mashed avocado mixture. I let it sit for 10 minutes because I wanted the oats to just absorb a little bit of that liquid. And then I cooked them just like I cook pancakes, but I used a tablespoon measure, 2 heaping tablespoons per pancake, and they came to about 3 inches or so in diameter. And I cooked them. I just put a little cooking spray in a nonstick skillet, cooked them over medium heat. I'm always mindful with pancakes. Sometimes they can burn. You have to really keep an eye on the heat. And it was about 3 to 4 minutes per side. And you have to turn them really carefully because they're really soft, but they'll cook up. But just when you turn them, just be careful. Turn them over, give them another 3 to 4 minutes, and you are good to go. And I let them cool, knowing that this was going to be for babies, and then I just sliced them into those stick shapes, and then voila, I was done. And so the recipe is over at lizshealthytable.com on the blog, and then on the podcast page, you'll find show notes from today's show with a lot of the resources that Katie and I have been talking about. But the recipe for the pancakes themselves are on the blog. And I will say, no matter how old your kids are, these are really great pancakes to serve. I suspect that Simon added a little bit of maple syrup, but maybe not. I mean, that's just a wild guess. But they're super nutritious. You've got 240 calories per serving because you've got the whole milk dairy. You've got the avocados, you've got the bananas. It's just concentrated, a lot of bang for your bite, as Katie says. You will get 3 grams of fiber, 9 grams of protein. You get potassium in this recipe. You're going to get vitamin C a little bit. You're going to get folate. You're going to get some of those good, heart healthy omega-3 fats. And so a lot of goodness, 15% of your daily requirement for calcium. Now, obviously, a baby's nutrient needs are different from an adult's. And even like a portion of an avocado, technically a portion of an avocado for an adult is 1/3 of an avocado. In full disclosure here, I could eat an avocado a day easily, my favorite food. But for a baby, it's 1/6 of an avocado. So the portion is smaller because, as Katie says, they have smaller tummies, right, Katie?
Certainly, and some babies will eat more and some will eat less than that. So I always encourage parents, start with that portion, but don't be surprised if some days they eat more and some days they eat less. Some days they'll eat like you and other days they'll eat nothing. So don't stress.
That's right. Let them self-regulate. And even with older kids, I always say when you serve dinner, serve everything family style. Let your kids regulate their own appetites. Maybe they're hungry one day, maybe they're starving one day. If you're just plating their food up, then they don't have that opportunity to they assume that's the portion they should be eating. Maybe they don't want to eat that much. Maybe they want seconds. So let kids serve themselves, give them that power, that control. That's good power, right? They're not looking at the clock saying it's 5 o'clock, I must eat now. They're saying I'm hungry and I'm going to serve myself and eat what I think my body needs. And it's the same with baby-led weaning, and that's why I love the whole concept, because you're really establishing such good eating habits from early on. And, I was thinking before when you were talking about Molly, even if you have a picky eater who might be 3 or 5, let's say, just by offering up a variety of foods and letting your child grab it and go for it, it's going to give them a little more ownership and a little more control. And you're right. You're going to see Molly, for example, eating more foods. And I think with kids who are hesitant, it's a great strategy. Kind of pretend they're babies and just put a bunch of foods out and see what happens.
Couldn't have said it better. It also saves a lot of time and money and energy and stress and heartache. And then your parents will brag about the foods that your kids eat, and your in-laws will as well.
That's right. And, it is amazing how recommendations change. When my kids were young, it was, you must feed them at 4 months. You must feed them that rice cereal. And you're right. Why? Why are they eating a refined white cereal as their first food? Cavemen did not eat white foods. Cavemen put down whatever. I think baby-led weaning's been around since cavemen. I think. What do you think, Katie?
Yes, certainly. The concept has been around since the inception of time, but we do have to give credit to kind of the founding mother of the term baby-led weaning, which was a term coined by British researcher Jill Rapley, who really specialized in kind of this whole approach and the philosophy of how we feed our kids. But it's certainly nothing new. And I think there's a very interesting book, if you're interested in this topic, called Inventing Baby Food, written by Amy Bentley, and she's a professor at NYU in the Food Studies program. And I had her as a guest on my show a few weeks ago, just talking about all this notion that we've been feeding babies since the beginning of mankind, and yet commercial baby food as an aisle in our grocery store has really only been around for just over, 150 years or so. So why is it then that we're so conditioned to think we have to feed our baby this certain type of food? It has a lot to do with marketing. It has a lot to do with big food. Many of the same things that we're faced with as parents are actually why our pediatricians recommended such foods like refined white carb cereal. So it's a great book called Inventing Baby Food if you want to learn more about the history of commercial baby food, to kind of solidify in your mind, hey, you know what? I should go with my gut and feed my baby the foods that I would want to eat if I were a baby.
Good. And Inventing Baby Food, I'll put a link in the show notes so people don't have to Google it. We'll Google it for you. I have a closed group on Facebook, and it is called Liz's Podcast Posse. And so I welcome everybody to head on over and join that group. Just click join and then I'll invite you right in. But Katie, you also have a closed Facebook group where you've created a nice community, and you have a show, you said, which is a Facebook Live show that you do every week. So tell everybody a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do have a Facebook group, a closed Facebook group called Baby-Led Weaning Recipes and Ideas, and it's a really supportive and collaborative environment. I know one thing when I started looking at baby-led weaning, I was so put off by how judgmental many of the strict baby-led weaning groups were. Just they spent their time telling you what you were doing wrong. And so when I designed my own group, it was really to make it a supportive environment where we could share recipes and ideas and answer questions in an environment where people support and build up each other. So if you go to my Facebook page, which is Fortified Fam, that's F-A-M, you can join the group from there as well, and I share a lot of great recipes in there. But I also do have a weekly live show called the Fortified Family Food Show, where I interview a number of different people from kind of the entire spectrum of family feeding. I just wrapped up an infant feeding series, and I know a lot of your listeners were actually involved in a 5-day baby food texture challenge that we did, kind of hosted it through the Facebook group. So I think it's a really wonderful community. So many really thoughtful moms and dads in there as well as caregivers. I work a lot with nannies and babysitters who are working with families who want to do this as well. Because that's the hard challenge if you're a working parent, right? You want to do a baby-led approach to feeding, but you go to work all day and someone else feeds your kids. So we work with kind of how do you talk to then the people on your team who are helping to feed your kid. A lot of the community stuff that I build is to help parents learn those and master those resources. And then the show is a forum to really share a lot of new ideas, new resources, and lots of different ideas about how we can feed our families. Because there's no wrong way to feed our family. I just love to share information about what's working for other people since we're all in the same boat together.
I just want to be a fly on the wall in your house when your kids are 18 years old. And I want to know how many bananas you're eating then, Katie.
Oh my gosh. You tell me about 2 boys, your boy's age, and I'm just already doing the math. My Costco bill alone last week, we're 2-cart Costco family now, made the jump last week, so I can take all 4 of them and another adult. And it was $500 with no wine and no meat. It was like, what? Usually wine and meat is what's going to kill you at Costco, at least in my family. But these kids are literally eating so much food, but I have to say I don't waste any of it, which is another thing I love about baby-led weaning. There's always an opportunity to work leftovers into what they're eating.
Okay. And I bet you do a lot of laundry, too.
Yes, I do a ton of laundry. I have to admit, one little drawback about baby-led weaning, and I'll save it for the end, but if you're still listening, it is a tad on the messy side. So you just have to be prepared. I've got a lot of great resources for you on my website about how to minimize mess and mitigate waste. But I also want you to keep in mind, don't let that mess hold you back, because spoon feeding a baby is not a particularly clean endeavor either.
You got that right. So I have a question here that came from a gal named Kath. She is in my closed Facebook group, and she says that she wants to know a little bit more about finger foods. She said that she typically steams and freezes fruits and vegetables. She steams and freezes small pieces of meat and fish as well. And recently she said she has made homemade turkey meatballs with baby oatmeal and fruit puree. She said it's a very interesting and healthy and tasty combination, but specifically she said she's looking for other suggestions regarding meat and fish-based finger food combinations, like combo meals, in order to ensure that she gets adequate iron into her baby's diet. So I know we talked a little bit earlier about, things like meatballs and salmon, but give us a few ideas for how to get iron-rich meats and seafood into a baby's diet and a toddler's diet.
Well, great question, Kath. And to answer kind of the overarching question about what finger foods to start with, again, there's no wrong way to do it, but I've got my 10 top finger foods for starting baby-led weaning. And it's a resource I have for you guys. If you go to firstfingerfoods.com, you can download that list of what we use in our family as the first 10 foods when we start a baby on solid foods. Now, as far as the particular question about iron and meat, I think it's wonderful that Kath is concerned about iron. I just don't want her to become overly concerned about it. Certainly if your baby has any sort of diagnosed iron deficiency, for babies that were born premature, and my babies were 6 weeks premature, that transfer of iron that babies get tends to happen at the tail end of pregnancy. So if your baby is preemie, there might be issues with iron, and you would want to speak with your primary care practitioner about the individual iron needs. But all meat, fish, and poultry contains iron. I usually encourage parents to offer it at least once a day if you can. And then also if you're struggling with what foods to eat, think about what foods you like that include meat, fish, or poultry, and then reverse engineer that for something that you can feed your baby. I know my husband loves beef. He's from Texas, and he loves meatloaf. Well, I make meatloaf regularly because it's something I can slice into those long sticks for the starter babies. It's a great combination food. I make my meatloaf with about half mushrooms, half meat. And if you go to my website, fortifiedfam.com, I've got a great recipe on there for mushroom meatloaves. And I make them in little muffin tins as well. You can make ahead of time and freeze them. So again, think about the foods that you like. How do you like fish? I like ceviche. I offer that to older babies, but I love salmon. So I incorporate salmon into cakes or fritters or patties or even just roasted salmon. It doesn't have to be a totally ornate and challenging recipe to make. Your baby's going to love the way that salmon tastes on its own.
Yum, yum. And we talked about choking very briefly. Before we wrap it up, just tell me why a baby is not going to be at increased risk of choking if they're starting off with slices of bananas and avocados and salmon and things of that nature.
Well, that's a great question because the biggest barrier to baby-led weaning that I experience in the families that I work with is their fear of gagging. So I want to point out that gagging is different than choking. Okay, choking is a life-threatening situation, and most parents have taken an infant CPR class. If you did that when your baby was little and born, you should probably do a refresher by the time they're about 6 months and starting solid foods, because it's always good to know the signs of choking and know what to do. But gagging is very different than choking. Okay, gagging is actually a good thing. And a baby gagging is the step that they need to go through in part of the process of learning how to eat. So on my show a couple weeks ago, I brought on a feeding expert who specializes in swallowing. And she talked all about why gagging is good. So if you want to watch that, if you go to the same website that I just mentioned, firstfingerfoods.com, I have the video up there, and she spends literally like an hour explaining to you why babies gagging is a good thing, what foods you should start with, and basically how do you get over your fear of gagging. Because the point is, you have to remember, it's an important part of your baby learning how to eat. They're going to gag a little bit at the beginning. She talks all about how the tongue changes as the baby gets closer to the age where they're supposed to be eating. And very young babies who don't put solid objects in their mouth, they gag on everything because they're not ready for solid food. But as that gag reflex starts to recede toward the back of their mouth as they approach the age of being able to eat, they then learn the ability to deal with their own foods. And they gag if it gets stuck in the wrong place, but they can self-correct, they can get out of that gagging situation, and they take right back to eating. But parents oftentimes interfere, and sometimes can cause a little bit of disconnect with regard to the baby. They're learning a lot at one time, right? How to chew and swallow and breathe at the same time. So I would always say to refer to a speech and language pathologist, and I've got a great feeding expert on my show at firstfingerfoods.com who can teach you a lot more about gagging.
Fantastic. And Katie, I love to ask all my guests before I let them off the hook, what is your favorite cookbook, or what is the cookbook that families should have on the shelf if they are feeding young kids? Anything come to mind that you love?
Well, when I was starting out looking for baby-led weaning recipes, I kind of found a dearth of recipes. There weren't a lot out there. So I do include over 100 recipes in my course at selffeedingbaby.com. So if you want to get some great recipes, you can find them there. But I know this sounds funny, but I have a really old Betty Crocker cookbook that I think my mom gave to me when I was in 7th grade because she got tired of me getting cookie batter all over the chocolate chip cookie recipe page because I loved to bake when I was younger. And so I use that one. It's just like simple old standby recipes. It's actually a really good base for starting out for foods for your baby because they're not too crazy and ornate. Even beginner cooks or people who don't love to cook can make these recipes. I just modify them slightly by not adding salt. And they sometimes have to tweak it with seasoning a little bit different, but good old-fashioned Betty Crocker recipes, not that exciting.
I love it. I love it. And is there a chef or a cookbook author out there who you would love to meet? A chef crush or somebody you admire? Who is it?
I have a major crush on Rachel Ray. I always have. I love her enthusiasm for olive oil. I myself am a connoisseur of olive oil, and I pretty much put it on everything. So I just kind of love everything that she puts out, and I love her energy and her passion for food and the fact that she's not afraid to mess up, because you don't need to be scared when you get in the kitchen. It should be an adventure, and sometimes it turns out the way we want it to, and sometimes it doesn't. So I like that about Rachel Ray.
I could totally see you and Rachel Ray hanging out.
Gosh, I would love to meet her.
You got to go on her show. I think you need to start tweeting her or something.
I might get in touch.
You got to get in touch. Well, Katie Ferraro, thank you for being on the show. Anything else you want to share with our listeners before we wrap it up?
I just want to tell parents, when you're starting out feeding your baby, that we all have fears, okay? Even feeding experts and speech pathologists, they're scared of starting solid foods. So don't be afraid. Don't let your fear get in the way. There's some wonderful communities of like-minded parents out there who are there to support you and give you ideas. And the key with achieving success in infant feeding and child feeding is persistence. Don't give up. Remember, you might have to offer a food to that kid 10 to 15 different times. But it's on you as the parent to stay persistent and to stay motivated, and know that there's experts and other parents out there who are willing and ready to help you to get you over your feeding fears and get your baby on the path to becoming an avid and an eater.
Fantastic. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
Well, that was an amazing interview, and I wish I talked to Katie 20 years ago. Thank you very much. But times have changed, and thankfully there's just so much more knowledge out there. So if you're a mom of a baby or a young kid, just, oh my gosh, check out Katie's stuff. Go on over to her website because she's just a wealth of information. And boy, she has a lot of energy for a mom of 5 under the age of 3. I am impressed. And if you want recipes to feed your family that are adventurous and nutritious and fun and easy to make, please head on over to my website, liz'shealthytable.com. And while you're at it, I do have some free resources on my books and freebies page. I've got a supermarket shopping list, a 7-day meal planner, and then I've got a series of coloring books called Color, Cook, Eat. And they are only $3.99 each. You can download all 3 for $8.99. So please visit Liz's Healthy Table for all of those resources. And as always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and shoot me an email anytime you want to check in. Join the Podcast Posse on Facebook. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.